Afternoon, everybody. It's officially afternoon by a minute. If you don't know who I am, my name is Kevin, and I do a weekly live either on Wednesday or on Thursday. And today's live is going to be trying to help you bridge the gap between what a lot of people refer to as training mode and then also more of like real life. Training mode is what a lot of times people see when they are trying to practice their training. They notice that when they start, their dog gets really into it and their dog does really well. But then when they are trying to do something in day-to-day life, their dog struggles and no longer listens. And it seems as if it's as simple as saying, well, my dog is in training mode sometimes and my dog listens, and then other times my dog just isn't listening. And it's as if he's not in training mode. So like, is training mode a thing? Like, let's start off by saying that. Is that a thing? Like, are we, can we like, is it a thing? So like, what does it mean to me? And I'll kind of give you all the general idea of what I think about when I refer to as, training mode. One, training mode would mean, and again, this is kind of generic. I'm not going off of actual definitions here or anything, but it's kind of like when your dog knows that you have something really tempting that they find very tempting, and they're willing to they're willing to do behavior for it. If you've done a lot of training, then they're going to do behaviors that you have worked on. So sits, downs, probably whatever default position that they normally, go into. If they have not had much training and you have something tempting, they're going to go to normal dog behaviors, more normal, meaning they're going to probably jump and try to get it out of your hand. And they're just going to do a lot of what we would refer to as impulsive type behaviors. So anyway, we typically are trying to teach them to control their impulses and do something more appropriate. But nonetheless, you're going to see training mode, generally speaking, when you have something of high value that your dog really, really wants. Now, so first off, there's nothing wrong with having something high value that your dog wants, and using that and leveraging that. So that's where food comes into play. Food or toys. So there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I highly encourage people to motivate their dogs to get behavior. But a big mistake that people make, is they will audition that they have something. And when they do that, their dog goes, haha, they have something, let me do my behaviors. Now, is there anything wrong with that? Not technically, but what you're going to see is your dog is going to be extremely responsive when he understands that you have something because you've auditioned something to him. But if you have not or do not, he is no longer going to listen to you, or he doesn't see the reason to. And something very obvious is I, reach into my treat jar and I grab out a treat and show it to him, and then I ask him to do something. That is the most obvious version of this, right? So we are showing food. We are quite literally auditioning food and saying, okay, I've got something, do this for me. So that's probably the most obvious version of this. And maybe you're watching this and going, well, I don't do that. I really try not to show them food first, which is great. But there are other things that we do that cause dogs to go into training mode. For example, if I put my treat bag on, and every single time I put my treat bag on, we're going into training mode. Maybe my dog doesn't, like, we're going into time to train. I just refer to it as training mode there. My dog will see me put my bag on, or maybe not see me physically put it on, but as soon as my dog sees me wearing my bag, he's going to go, yes, I know what that predicts. So treat bag on human means dog is going to get snacks, dog is going to work for it. So all of a sudden your dog is going to pay very, very close attention, because when that treat bag is on, it means something good is going to happen for him or her. But so that's one that you may not think about. And so, like, for example, I wear my treat bag every day when we go for walks. But that also being said, on my walks, I'm not constantly feeding my dogs. So they don't just look at me like, oh, the treat bag's on, it's time, it's time, it's time. So you may wear your treat bag on walks and maybe your dog forgets about it. In a lot of cases they do. But if you're putting your treat bag on, for example, in your house, so if I grabbed a treat bag off of the shelf and put it on me, V, who's lying down next to me, would most likely get up and look at me and say, hey, cool, something's going on here. I should get ready. There's probably food involved. So there's that part of it. So we a lot of times we are doing something to let our dogs know that food is about to be available, that gets our dogs excited, and then they start paying really close attention. So that's more of like a practice session. But then in real life, and not in, it's all real life, but in day-to-day life, if I wanted my dog V, who's lying down next to me, to come to me, if a lot of people would call their dog and their dog would just look at them like, there's nothing in it for me. So you kind of are accidentally developing what we refer to as like a show me the money type of dog. It's like that old that movie, um, Jerry, show me the money. What's the name of the actual movie? Whatever, Tom Cruise. But basically, we don't want to develop a show me the money type of dog, because that's what ends up happening. So if we go back to the first example that I gave, we at All Dogs Go to Kevin use like a lure reward method, which basically means in a lot of the beginning of a lot of the behaviors, we audition food to get the behavior, but we quickly try to turn it into a hand signal. So therefore, we're no longer auditioning food in the beginning. Sometimes people get stuck at the food lure step, and then their dog is like, well, no, I really need to see that piece of food in order for me to work for you. That's kind of what he might say in his head. So people can get stuck there. And so it's really important to get into the hand signal step. And I'm going to talk about how to start incorporating hand signals or verbal cues first in the actual sequence to make sure that our dogs are responding to the cues and not to food. But we have to be careful not to always be stuck luring. It's something that if you're going to lure, we want to turn it into a hand signal pretty quickly and make sure the reward comes second. And if you're going to use a treat bag, one of the best things you can do is wear your treat bag often. So therefore that does not necessarily predict something. So if you only, again, ever put your treat bag on and then something's going to happen, your dog is going to listen to you when you put that treat bag on, or there's a high probability, because the treat bag going on predicts tasty food for your dog. Now, some solutions. Let's kind of dive into that. So what do? I'm a dog trainer, and I use food to reward my dogs. My dogs very rarely get excited about food because, one, they do get it quite frequently. Basically, if I'm using food for training, I feed them a little bit less from their meals to balance it all out, but they get food pretty frequently. I really try to focus on feeding for position, which means feeding them in the position you want them in. That also decreases some of the excitement, but nonetheless, it happens quite frequently. But one of the things that I do, so I have, and I've already pointed out, I've got treat jars placed strategically throughout my home. So I do have rewards handy. Now, here's another thing before I jump into that. I guess I'll call it a mistake. It's not, I don't even know if I should refer to it as that, but another thing that people do, another mistake, is they want to, well, let's face it, most dogs know where the treat jar is. So a lot of families have a dog treat jar in their house. We had one growing up. It was right next to the cookie jar for the humans. But so a lot of times the person will go over to the cookie jar, for the dog cookie jar, and they'll either make that first mistake I mentioned where they grab a treat first and then get the dog to do behavior, or simply standing next to the treat jar and constantly asking for behaviors. Your dog is like, hey, there's a high probability of a payout if I'm here. So when my human stands in this location in the kitchen, for example, I like to listen because that pays. So if you always basically practice your training in one spot, and that spot is where like the cookie jar is, your dog also realizes that and is much more likely to listen there than out in a different location. So point of everything so far is food's got to come second in the training, meaning we get the behavior to happen first, the food comes second, and the food has to kind of come from out of sight. Not I don't want to go to the fridge and grab a cheese stick and say, okay, let's do sit down, stage it up. My dog's gonna fly right through those. But again, if I didn't go to the fridge and grab that cheese stick, my dog's gonna look at me and be like, and just walk off. So again, focus on what you're doing first, and that's going to be a big part of the solution. So if I have, treat jars placed strategically in my home, if I have one, like I have one here in my office, which I don't have to use that often. I mean, most my dogs are a bit older. They just kind of default to a lie down and fall asleep. I don't even have to do downstays that much with them in certain contexts, but I want to have treats at the ready so I can reward them. I always want to ask for the behavior first before I do any sort of interacting with the actual jar. So I don't grab this and say, do X, Y, or Z, because then I'm going to develop a pattern that my dogs must see me grab that thing first. And I don't want that. I want to give you all a little hint too about how we can start this off, but I have those placed strategically in my house. So I've got one in the kitchen because we do a lot of downstairs in the kitchen. I've got one in my office and one in the living room if need be for that as well. So what I like to do though is ask for the behavior, produce the reward second. What ends up happening is they start going, okay, well, it pays to listen regardless of the context or the scenario, because, he does pay often, he meaning me. So that also being said, if I never rewarded them, if I, day in and day out said, come here, down, stay, and I never rewarded them, the responses are going to drop quickly. There's no motivation to do it. Unless I start yelling at them or something, which I'm not going to do, I'm not going to get much of a response. So I still need to reward them to keep them motivated to continue to provide a consequence for the behavior. So start working on this. Here's a good solution for you. Put some treat jars strategically placed throughout your home. And what you can do is basically use those as rewards. You can either capture behavior. So for example, V is lying down right now. I could grab a treat out of that jar and reward him. And he wasn't even thinking about food first. He wasn't even thinking about doing a behavior intentionally. He's just, intentionally meaning for food. But I could reward that. And it does teach my dog that doing certain behaviors can have a good outcome. Even if not asked, but food's not coming first in that scenario. So kind of capturing is kind of a cool thing where you can just capture what you see and reward that. You can also start off with really easy stuff. I could, walk over to V right now and ask him to make eye contact with me. And eye contact's a pretty easy one. I mean, you can prompt it pretty easily. So you can work on a watch cue. So whether you've done like the digital course that we have, or whether we've worked with you in person, you walk up and you'd say watch. And if it doesn't happen, you can easily do your hand signal. There's like a 98% chance you're going to get eye contact. If not, make some kissing noises, you'll get eye contact. And then you say, good boy. And you walk over to the treat jar, grab a treat, and reward him. And all of a sudden, just by doing that a few times a day, you're going to start having a new relationship with, your dog responding to you when he clearly, when you're not clearly auditioning something first. So try to do something like that, and that's a great way to do it. Again, don't grab the food first, because then what ends up happening is they will start going, oh yes, food is there, it's time to train. We want to get them to respond whether or not we're auditioning something. I think one of the things that I also want to point out, and I made mention of it already, is I reward my dogs quite frequently. I do it on purpose because that is just how learning works and how behavior works. If you don't reward it, you're not going to get much of it. You're going to get into more of a power struggle. So if I say sit and my dog sits and is like, and maybe I reward him on occasion, I might still have some sits there. If I reward him all the time, I'm going to have quite frequent sits. If I just stop rewarding him, the sits are going to decrease and decrease. So if you are using food to train, the big ticket or the big thing is get the food out of sight. Be conscious of what you're doing. If you always go to the kitchen and stand in that same spot and do all your practice, that is where your dog is most likely to listen. If you go out into the yard and ask for something, your dog might completely blow you off because you never practice out there. Get the food, food must come second. You can start capturing behaviors as well. So if your dog is doing something, walk over and reward them. You could have some treats in your pocket too. And just, if your dog knows that you do, wait for him to completely forget. When he lies down and forgets, then a few minutes later, ask for behavior, then reward him. That's fine as well. Just do your best to not make a production out of the fact that you're going to have food on you, because they will pay attention to that and they will notice. Another thing. So we always go with, when we're using food, all those rules, like the rules I just said, apply. We want to make sure it comes second. Here's the thing, in day-to-day life, one of the crazy things that happens is that motivation is readily available. So motivation meaning they see things that they want and they're willing to do behavior. What we can do with training is we can leverage those things. And no matter what we do, they're going to see those things first. So meaning if I'm walking down the street and my dog loves people and people want to say hello to my dog, I can communicate to my dog with training, of course, that if he sits, then, hey, Nancy, if he sits, then he gets to greet the person. There's going to obviously be some excitement involved there because the person is already there. So we're basically, in that sense, dangling the food out there and saying, you can have that, but you've got to sit first. So in real life, you are going to encounter a lot of scenarios, which is why there's so much excitement, where your dog sees what it wants. And either you just go ahead and say, you know what, you don't get that either today, or you never get that. Or you leverage it and say, yeah, you can have that if you do the right stuff. It takes a little bit of work, but you can get there. So for example, with V on walks, he loves to sniff. His favorite thing to do is just stop and smell trees and pee on stuff. I don't even think about it much anymore. But back in the day when I was focusing on training him to walk without pulling, I slowly integrated him stopping and sniffing into the reward for a loose leash. So if he pulled, I would stop him and say, "I'm sorry, buddy, you don't get to move forward at all. If the leash is loose, you get to go and sniff." So that, with more and more exposure to these things, excitement dies down. They're still interested in the reward, but their excitement dies down. So I just want to mention that in certain scenarios, you're going to have something there that they're going to see, and that's going to be really exciting for them. Um, you kind of have to fight through that because the motivator already has appeared. People coming over your house, or people is an easy one, or dogs. What if my dog loves another dog, and all of a sudden my dog wants to pull and lunge to get over there? You can work on leveraging that and saying, "Hey, if you want to greet that dog, assuming everything's okay to, assuming we can do a greeting and it's safe to do so, you've got to walk with a loose leash to get over there. And when you get there, you just can't pull it all, for example. So we can, with repetition and training, we can teach them how to do all these things. Again, you can leverage them in day-to-day life. And a lot of out and about training does consist of leveraging what they come across, but you still would want to bring food with you. So to summarize, if you want your dog to be more responsive in a real world type of setting, meaning even in your house, in a non-training mode context, start working on getting them to do behaviors before you're doing anything to let them know that you have food at the ready. So either have food in your pocket well ahead of time, or have a treat jar nearby. Ask for something simple like eye contact, and then reach into your pocket or reach into the treat jar and reward them. You can wear a treat bag as well. That's awesome. It's a great tool to use. But if you always put that treat bag on first and then ask for behavior, your dog is clearly seeing you put the treat bag on and says, "Hey, when that treat bag is on, that means that something awesome happens for me. That's when I really want to spend most of my time training," is what your dog would be saying. But then when you take the treat bag off and put it away, your dog is going to look at that and go, "Well, that, you don't have your treat bag on. That means I might not be getting food." And it's not as like, it's not as detailed thoughts as I'm actually describing. They simply see it and go, "Well, green light," or they see it not on and they go, "Well, the green light is not there." So focus though on basically get them to do behavior without food in sight, then reward them. Do it in different locations. Have the food in your pockets ahead of time, or wear your treat bag. Wear your treat bag often, so therefore it doesn't predict anything obvious. Wear it all day. Wear it for a few hours a day. Take it on. Take it on. Put it off, just so it loses its predictive value. So these little hints or tips or whatnot will kind of help you bridge the gap between training mode and real life. Be extremely consistent, stay patient, reward the behaviors that you want to see more of. And again, try to reward them after you've seen them happen, whether you're cueing it or whether you're just capturing it. Reward those. And whatever you do, try not to audition food first, unless you're doing a lure reward method, which you're trying to quickly turn into a hand signal method. So all right, y'all. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks so much. Bye.